Okay, good to see you, everybody. We're going to try this new development here. As you know, the schedule at Millikan is a bit challenging, especially for an AP class. Usually I would lecture quite a bit, but I'm having trouble finding time to do that because it's hard to sit in front of a screen for 6 to 8 hours a day. I know, I get that. I'm a person too. And it's very difficult for me to sit there and teach the whole time. And so we're doing synchronous and asynchronous. So lectures have kind of gone out the window, but I do think it's a valuable portion of the curriculum. So we're going to try this. I'm going to try lecturing in my off time, posting it, and then having some kind of assignment to make sure that you guys, read and listen to it. So let me cover the first lecture for this class. I know I covered for most of my classes the beginning part here. Let me share my screen, obviously, so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. But this was what I covered here, just the beginning portion A. This is what's known as pre-Columbian Indian history. So pre-Columbian refers to before Columbus. 1491 is usually that designation, even though for thousands of years, Native Americans lived without any contact with anyone from the Eastern Hemisphere. By far the biggest contribution that they had made to civilization was the cultivation of maize or corn. It's densely caloric. It's more caloric per acre than wheat, barley, or rice. This allowed large populations to thrive. And this took thousands of years to take these tiny little corn and selectively breed them to get this wonderful crop that we use today and is so important to the American diet. We use corn in its raw form to have corn on the cob and popcorn. We use it as a sort of feed to feed our livestock. So when you're eating an In-N-Out burger, guess what? That cow had been fed for all those years to fatten it up real good. Corn meat, corn feed, right? Similar to when you have pork, when you have chicken, when you have fish. Fish are fed that as well. Huge section of the Midwest, Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas. These are just, corn cultivation. That's really all that they do. And so that was all owed to the Native Americans and both the Aztec in Central America, but also all of the various tribes of what's today the United States. All of them were in some capacity involved in the planting, harvesting, consumption of maize or corn. And white Europeans who came absorbed that that practice, and the rest is history, so to speak. Now, did talk about animist religion. So Native Americans had very different attitudes about the earth, that the earth was a god, and that to disturb it would unleash these evil spirits, right? Like if you chop down a whole wilderness and started planting to exponentially produce more corn than you had the previous years, Europeans, this is what they were all about, right? The wilderness to Europeans is where witches would dwell and Satan lived there. And if you got lost in the woods, you would maybe lose your immortal soul. Whereas Native Americans said the wilderness, it is God or nature itself. You don't want to disturb it. And if you do disturb it too much by overplanting, by deforesting, it would unleash evil spirits that would bring about famine, disease, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a very different attitude toward farming and nature. Native Americans were semi-nomadic, meaning that they followed the herd. And they, altered nature a bit with these gardens they would have to grow corn, beans, squash, but they wouldn't deforest entire areas and then plant so that they would have surplus grain and corn so that they could sell to other people. There was really no concept of money in the system. They bartered and traded. There was no banks, no concept of capital investment. It really is a different world than white Europeans who had a property system. This belongs to me. I have a piece of paper that says it belongs to me, and I'm going to take it to a judge who will authorize a constable to arrest you if you're on my land. So this is necessarily going to bring about conflict over the use of land. So the seeds are really planted right there. If Native Americans lived by rivers, they would often fish. They had the techniques to build canoes, but not big ocean-going vessels. They largely did not have metal tools at all. They might have arrowheads, which was pieces of metal they sort of filed down to use, as weapons, but had no techniques of, metallurgy with blacksmiths to make knives or guns or anything complex. And no domesticated animals, which put them at a severe disadvantage. And most importantly, no immunities to infectious disease. Into this walks the Spanish, who conquered this huge red empire here. By the mid-late 1580s. They had conquered and dominated all of this, which was extraordinary. It remains one of the largest empires human beings had ever seen. The kingdoms of Castile and Aragon merged in the 1470s to fight the Moors in Spain. These are Arabs from the Abbasid Caliphate, who had conquered pretty much all the Middle East and North Africa. They then crossed the Strait of Gibraltar to come into Spain, and the Spanish from 711 until 1492 battled against the Moors and had to slowly unify the kingdoms of Spain, right? These are Christian, Catholic, Spanish kingdoms that have all fractured, right? So there was no concept of Spain yet. And so you had provinces like Asturias and Catalunya and Andalusia and Castile and Aragon and all of these various ones, Extremadura, and they had to unify to try to beat this common enemy, the Moors. This became a holy war, sort of part of the Crusades. It lasted nearly 800 years, and the Spanish were victorious. They win the Reconquista on January the 2nd, 1492, and just purging all of the Iberian Peninsula of the Muslim Caliphate. Granada is the last fortress in Spain, last Moorish Muslim fortress, and they are defeated. They surrender on January 2nd, 1492. Just 7 months later, Queen Isabella hires Columbus, and he sails across the ocean, hoping to find India, and instead he lands right smack dab in the middle of the Caribbean. Then starts this process of colonization with his 3 little ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. He comes back. He tells them about his stories. Although he found very little of value, not really much gold or anything else, this created a frenzy where now the Spanish crown said, well, we have to find more. So they now raise more money through taxation. They're a big unified kingdom, bigger than anything in Europe. All the other kingdoms of Europe were small and separated by language. France and England are a bit of an exception to that. They are unified to a certain degree, but they're fighting with their neighbors, right? The English are fighting against the Irish, and they have ancient rivalries with the French and the Dutch. So they're, for 100 years, really left out of this process. The Spanish and the Portuguese are the only ones that can really begin this. So they go. Spanish land in Mexico, Cortez in the 15-teens, Pizarro in Peru in the 1530s. And in a matter of a couple of decades, they're able to conquer this vast empire shown in red. This big gray area here will belong to Portugal, that today is Brazil, of course. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas cut the Western Hemisphere in 2. Fearing that there would be this big Catholic war between these 2 great empires, the Pope sat down with them and said, we're going to cut South America in 2. Brazil will go to Portugal. Everything else to the west will go to Spain. So Spain gets the lion's share of the land in the Americas. But there's a whole nother hemisphere here. Africa is given to the Portuguese. This is before the Dutch. The Dutch do not land in South Africa till the 16-teens. So that's another 100 years away. In the late 1490s, Portugal was given the rights to conquer Africa and India and all these other places. Spain does get one item in Asia, and that is the Philippines. So look at this red empire here. You get a lot of mileage out of Spanish. This is why, my son, he's 6 years old. I got him in Bixby so that he could get this dual immersion language, because he knows English already. That is, pretty much the universal language of the world today. Spanish is pretty close up there. There are some 22 or 23 nations that speak Spanish, most of them in the Western Hemisphere. And it's no mystery as to why they do. The Spanish conquered and colonized these places. The largest of these countries is Mexico, about 120 million people. But all throughout Central and South America, you have these Spanish-speaking and Catholic nations. Wherever they conquered, they converted people, because this was a holy war, part of La Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain. Now they have the Conquista to pay God back for siding with them against the Moors. For him, they're going to conquer and convert as many souls as possible, and they tried very hard. Here in California, they built the mission system, attempting to convert as many Native Americans as they could find by force. And the Spanish language spread. These were conquistadors. These were men who did not bring wives with them. It was thought this was like, you know, when you watch these movies that are like old Westerns, the feeling was that this was no place for ladies. We're not going to bring our wives or daughters with us. And so what that meant was Native American women would fill that role. They would become the brides. There'd be intermarriage. There'd be this whole new race of people brought into existence called mestizo, who are going to be half Spanish and half Indian. And still to this day, that's the majority population of Mexico, is mestizo. And people are all in certain proportions, part Indian and part Spanish. In America, in the United States, it's very different. The English brought wives with them by and large, and so there was very little intermarriage with the Indian women, I should say. So you don't see that dynamic as much, the sort of mixing. So we have this process that would go on for 100 years or so. What's really going to end Spain's dominance is 1588. England is going to fight this rather large naval war with Spain and sink most of the Spanish fleet off the coast of Holland. And this was a tremendous moment for this English and for Queen Elizabeth I. And it's really the moment where England becomes a mighty power like Spain does. They don't have their first colony for another 20 years until 1607 Jamestown. But that's going to turn the tide. Spain had this roughly 100-year process, 1492 to 1588, where they were the top dog. Only Portugal could sort of challenge them, and even the Portuguese couldn't do very much. There's another challenge to the east. The Ottoman Empire would fight a very brief war with Spain in the middle 1500s. It's a naval battle, the Battle of Lepanto, which the Spanish win, and the Ottomans basically feel, we're just going to let you have the Atlantic and the Western Hemisphere, and we'll focus more on the Middle East. It's a question of who's more powerful, who could control more, but that's never played out other than this small battle. So Spain's the top dog during this time. There were revolts, like in 1609 in what's today Santa Fe, New Mexico. The great Indian leader Pope, that's not Pope, it's Pope, led a revolt against the Spanish because of their brutal practices of conversion, of the encomienda, of taking the land and giving it to Spanish landlords and making the Native Americans into peasants. And so there were revolts all through this period. Okay, so we're going to move on to the French. The French are part of this process. In 1608, they are going to establish their very first colony in the New World. It is known as Quebec, or as we call it, Quebec. The city of Quebec here in the province of Quebec. France is going to be a bit different in this process. They are not as gung-ho about religion as the Spanish are, so they're not there really for the purpose of conversion. They are there to conduct business. Now, they're looking for gold. They don't find any, but what they do find is tribes of Native Americans who are willing to do business with them. The fur trade is what's going to take off like wildfire in what's today Canada, or Quebec, the province of Canada. So along the St. Lawrence River here, the St. Lawrence River really starts with the snow melt in the Catskills here, and it flows northward out to the sea. And all along the St. Lawrence River, you're going to have these major cities, and they're all going to be French. So the French first established this little fort at Quebec, 1608. And what they do is they say, we just want this little fortress here. we are going to give you all kinds of goods from France. We're going to give you grain and barley and draft animals like horses and oxen and guns and knives and all this cool stuff that you want from us. And what we want from you in return is twofold. Number one, we want furs. We'll buy them from you here and we will store them in fortresses on the river. We're not going to take your land like the English and the Spanish did. You can continue to have access to the land, but we do want an alliance. Technically, we, the French, will be in charge of this area because we are the only ones who have the intelligence. I don't mean the intelligence like the smartness, but the intelligence like the military intelligence to know where English and Spanish scouts are, where their forces are, and whenever we need to go to war with them to protect this arrangement, you will have our back. And they did. And so the French made various alliances, mostly with the Hurons, but with other Native American tribes as well. And so by the 17 teens, after about 100 years from 1608 to 1718, they controlled this vast empire in the center of what's today America. This is known as the French Crescent, or if you're really French, you'd say croissant. And basically, it's the mouth of the St. Lawrence River through the Great Lakes down to the Ohio and Mississippi rivers out through the Gulf of Mexico. So we'll just do the highlights real quick, right? At first, 1608. If you guys are unaware, Quebec is the oldest city in North America. Some people say St. Augustine, Florida, but that's a small city both today, and it was just a fortress city when it began in the 15 teens. Quebec is a beautiful city. I've never been there, but everybody who has been tells me even more than Montreal, Quebec City is just gorgeous. Beautiful architecture, wonderful town. It's a bit smaller than Montreal. It's about 700,000 or 800,000 people, so it's about the size of Portland or Seattle. And this is lost on most Americans. Deep in the recesses of our minds, we kind of know that Quebec is a French-speaking province in Canada, but we largely ignore it in America. But fully 20% or 1/5 of the Canadian population is from Quebec. And to some degree or another, they speak French. So the dynamics are a little difficult. Now, I've never been to Quebec, but I've studied this a lot. And from what I understand, you as a tourist can go there. Everybody speaks English. Everybody knows English. I mean, how could you not? You're right next to this giant country, America, and the rest of your country, Canada, that all speaks English. In order to get by, you would have to know English. But you must understand French Canadians, or Quebecois, as they call themselves, are incredibly, how shall we say, proud to be French speaking, and they do not want to speak English. The French would lose the 7 Years' War in 1763, and they have never gotten over it. If you guys are unaware, the French believed in the 1600s, and with very good reason, they were the most powerful nation on earth, that they were destined to inherit the world, that French would be the lingua franca, the sort of official religion of the world. It already was for academia. All the best educated sons and daughters in Europe would all study at the Sorbonne in France. Most of the courts, like, the royal families of Europe, all spoke French. Even in Russia, even in Germany, it was felt that France was sort of the peak of civilization. And when they lost this war in 1763, it just absolutely stunned them. And they've been in denial ever since. You may not know, but when you go to France, there is an entire committee that regulates the French language. Because, as you probably know, America's this big country. We dominate a lot of fields. And so new words come up every year. Like, 20 years ago, the word internet came out. And so we just started using it in America, log on to the internet. And in France, they had this quandary. What do we call it? Now, in Mexico, they just did what most people do. They just said, all right, that comes out of America. We'll call it El Internet. Right? In France, no. So they actually have this government committee that sits down and creates these new words in French so that the population will continue to speak it, because they know this is, sort of an insidious act of seduction almost, where the English language seduces young French people through our sports. American sports are pretty big, not football, but basketball and not really baseball either, but basketball is huge in France. And the fear is that through movies and music and sports, young people will listen to it and they'll start speaking English, and then French will be but a memory. So they're very jealously guarding this and protecting it. Quebec is even more extreme in this. If you go to Quebec, they literally have laws that say, if you open up a restaurant in Montreal or Quebec City, the title of it must be in French. You can have the English translation of your title, but the font must be smaller in the writing than the French one, right? So you can have, you know, John's Pizzeria. John's Pizzeria has to be like in parentheses below the French title, which is got to be much bigger. And they literally get out the measuring stick and they measure how big is the font. And if you don't follow the law, guess what? They fine you and they shut you down, which just seems unthinkable to us in America. If you travel on Air Canada, which I have done before, you become painfully aware that there are French speakers aboard, right? So like I went from a flight from LAX to Toronto. Toronto's in Ontario. It's not a French-speaking province or city, but guess what? Under the law, all Quebecois have the right to receive announcements, information in French. All the nutritional information, whatever you make, is printed in French. Have you guys ever gotten those instructions from IKEA or a toy? And you're like, why is there like French here along with the English? It's not because the manufacturers want to reach French markets. They want to sell in Canada, and it is the law that they must have that in French as well. So they are very proud of that fact, and they still haven't gotten over the fact that they lost the 7 Years' War. So this is the legacy of all this. The French had a pretty dominant position. They established Quebec in 1608, Montreal in 1642. They reached the Great Lakes here by the early 1700s, and they set up, you know, a series of fortresses and strategic places, the most important of which is here in Michigan. They called it Detroit, which I'm sure you guys all refer to it that way, right? Detroit. You guys refer to Detroit as Detroit? Of course not, right? We just try to translate it as best we can. I want you to kind of notice that. That's why the French are a bit snooty, because English speakers have almost a contempt for French. We don't even try to pronounce it, right? I've learned that when you do go to Paris, they are unbelievably rude, but I'm sorry if that is stereotypical or offensive, but it's very true. If you go to Paris, they will flat out send you in the wrong direction if they don't like you. Imagine, if you will, you live in a city, Paris, the most visited city on earth. It's the biggest tourist attraction of all. And most of the people in your city try to speak to you in English, which is not your language. Because if you're from Slovenia, or if you're from Russia, or if you're from China, you're not going to learn a million different languages. You're going to learn one or two. And the one that most people learn as their second language is English. It gets you the most mileage. And guess what? Most Parisians do speak English too. They just pretend they don't. And they get upset and they send you to the wrong place and stuff like that, right? So they get angry and they make these committees that actually try to preserve the language. So we got Detroit here. Along the Ohio River, they have a little city here in today, what's Kentucky. It's called Louisville, named after the French king, Louisville. They don't pronounce it that way. If you've ever been to Kentucky, it's Louisville, right? We say Louisville because we're from California. They say Louisville. And of course, you have here on the Mississippi, you have this large city in what's today Missouri called St. Louis, or St. Louis. And all the way down here at the mouth of the Mississippi, you have a very important city that they found as Nouvelle Orleans, or New Orleans is what we call it. Nouvelle Orleans, or New Orleans, 1718. So they have this vast empire here. Now, understand that the color coding of this empire is rather deceptive. You might think this is an enormous empire. In reality, it is an Indian empire, because most of the population, the warriors, et cetera, are all going to be Native Americans. The French ostensibly have control, but it's estimated the entire population of the French Crescent, even as late as the 1750s, was probably no more than 15 to 20,000 people, which is very small. Here, this sort of reddish pink area, this is what will be called British North America. It stretches from Maine all the way down to Georgia. And the population there is somewhere between 1.5 million to 2 million by the 1760s. So the English were much more successful at transplanting their population and getting people to go to the New World. This is part of the irony of this process, is that life was too comfortable in France. I mean, of course it is, right? This is why people like Johnny Depp have second homes in the south of France, because it's very comfortable there. They have a great lifestyle. And so even French peasants had a better life than English peasants did. You know, English peasants are falling all over themselves to sell themselves into slavery to go to Virginia, whereas in New France, they just said, why should I leave? I have it so nice here. They had this notorious problem of trying to get population to move, which is why they were never going to control North America and why they do eventually lose and why they still have not gotten over it yet. Okay, so we did the Spanish, we did the French. What you need to remember is that the French have by far the best relations with the Native Americans. They were not all about, hey, we're gonna come in with sword and convert you and take your land. The idea was, let's make a deal. Let's make a deal that's mutually beneficial. You know, we didn't start colonizing this area, the Spanish did, and all these other countries are out to take your land. So make a deal with us. This is the best deal you're going to get. We'll stay in these little cities, strategic cities along the river. We're not going to take your land and become farmers. We're just going to buy furs from you and sell them in Europe. They were a big luxury item, and let you live your life, but be allies with us, and we may have to go to war with the English every once in a while. And so they did. And that was a nice little cozy relationship. Now we have New Netherlands, New York. This is the Dutch. So if you've seen a map of Europe, Holland is this tiny little country that is wedged between Germany to the east, France to the west, and England to the north, which is an island country. But those three countries kind of surround and threaten Holland and always have. Today, Europe is a very peaceful place and everybody kind of gets along. But back in the day, it was not the case. Now, the Dutch had been colonized and controlled by the Spanish for quite some time. First, it was the Austrians. The Austria-Hungarians had this enormous empire from the Middle Ages throughout Central Europe, and they controlled the Netherlands as well. This is the Habsburg Empire. Now, the Dutch become, by the late 1500s, the most sophisticated place on earth. They had the best schools in the world. They had modern banking techniques, which nobody else had figured out. They invent the joint stock company, the corporation. They become the best farmers in the world. They invent the seed drill, which, you know, before the seed drill, you would just sort of take seeds and scatter them and waste a lot. Now you have this little device that you could like poke a hole into the earth, pull a trigger, and a little bit of water would come out with the seed to make sure that you didn't waste seed. It made them much more productive farmers. And they have these great breakthroughs in art. If you go to a lot of museums, there's a lot of Dutch artwork from the 1600s, 16 teens. The great artist Rembrandt made these wonderful three-dimensional paintings that were far ahead of what everybody else was doing in the world at the time. The problem that the Dutch have is that their population is so small. They're 1/6 the size of England, which means they're about 1/30th the size of France, and they were never going to be destined to conquer the world, even though pound for pound, individual for individual, they're more productive and richer than their counterparts. But it's kind of like today, if you look at these countries, who's the richest country per capita in Europe? It's always Belgium or Luxembourg, but these are tiny countries that don't have the population to dominate. So let's talk about the Dutch. What did they do? Well, they become this world power. They break free from Spain. Spain actually invades Holland in the middle 1500s because the Martin Luther Revolution comes to Netherlands. They had a very well-educated population who wanted to read the Bible. And when they did, they said, hey, the Catholic Church is wrong about everything. We're going to change everything. And that got them into trouble. So the Spanish actually invaded, tried to take the Bibles away from everyone and said, you will be Catholic. Amazingly, this was actually a cause for war 500 years ago, is you're worshiping God in the wrong way, which seems crazy to us today. the Dutch would win. They would fight this war of resistance. If you guys know, it's a country that's below sea level. They build these levees that hold back the water, and they pump the water out, and they've created more arable or farmable land in the last 500 years in Holland. Most of the country's below sea level. They're ingenious at this stuff, and they actually flooded their entire country to get rid of the Spanish, and it worked. By the early 1600s, they are free. The English helped free them in 1588 when they sank the Spanish Armada, and the Dutch sort of leapfrogged to become the most sophisticated country on earth. The way they do that is through banking. It sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. The first corporation on earth was the Dutch East India Company. They sell these little certificates for stock, and they're able to buy an entire fleet of ships, the largest fleet in the world. Now, understand how this works, that before this time, before corporations existed, an individual, like a king or queen, would have to go and borrow from 1 or 2 or 3 banks. And guess what? If you defaulted, if you lost, you would lose everything. This much more sophisticated way to do it is that you share the risk amongst thousands of people by selling stock. The stock is a share of the corporation. And so people all over the world have these certificates. It's not just Dutch investors. People in England and Spain and France and Germany all bought these certificates. The Dutch East India Company bought a fleet of ships, which was larger than the French fleet, the Spanish fleet, the Dutch Navy itself, the English Navy, and they went out and conquered huge sections of the globe. This is kind of insane to us. Imagine today if Walmart or Amazon had its own navy and went out and conquered other countries, okay? Which is, some of you say, well, we're not far off from that, right? That's how the future will look. There'll just be 5 or 6 companies in the future, and we'll all pledge our allegiance to one of them, and there won't be countries anymore. That's a dystopian, view, and it's certainly far from reality now, but that was the 1600s. The East India Company conquers Indonesia, the prize of the Dutch crown, and it was owned by a private company. They then are going to plant sugar and tea in the East Indies and be very, very good at it, making huge sums of money. The first investors in the Dutch East India Company reaped benefits tenfold, meaning that if they gave $100 to the East India Company, they made 1,000 back, which is just profits unheard of today, because they literally stole a whole country, took the land, and didn't have to pay any of those operating costs back to the corporation. They conquer South Africa, which you may not realize what the dynamics there are, but there's a tiny white minority that controls all the land, all the wealth, and all the power positions of South Africa. This is because the Dutch come in the 16 teens, the Boers, as they're called, B-O-E-R-S. These are the white Dutch settlers who come in and take all the land. Later, the English, the British, would come in and conquer it, which is why it's an English-speaking country. The English will later leave, but the original Dutch settlers will stay. They're only about 10% of the population, but they controlled all of the land still and everything. And they had this awful system known as apartheid. You guys might have heard of it, like a segregation system. They did not end this process until 1994. I was in high school when it finally fell apart. Don't extrapolate from that and assume Dutch people are racist or anything like that. That they're not. In fact, it's one of the more progressive places in the world. When you read about Amsterdam, it's incredibly progressive. It's just this one area where the settlers happen to be incredibly racist and founded an incredibly racist society. To America, what's important to us about the Dutch is their settlements in New York and, of course, New Jersey. We forget that often, but New Jersey's there as well. They founded it as New Netherlands. The colony was New Netherlands. The city itself was New Amsterdam, is what they called it. They called it after their capital. Now, if you're unaware, this here is a map of Manhattan. It's oriented incorrectly. It really should be turned counterclockwise 90 degrees, because this is pointing south. This is the southern tip of Manhattan. So you have here, right? This was really just a cattle path between the farms of the northern tip of Manhattan and the southern part, which was where ships would dock all along the harbor. Manhattan is an island. And so here, this runs north and south. This is the Hudson, which takes you, 100 miles up to Albany and the mountains. This here is known as the East River, which is not really a river. It's like an estuary. It's where, the ocean meets the river. And ships can park all along this harbor and unload and offload goods. It's a wonderful natural port, just sort of created by nature. This, when the English come in, this wall to separate, the cattle from the actual city is ripped up and a street is made, which is just called Wall Street. I'm sure you guys all know Wall Street. And this right here was known as Broadway, right? It was a Broadway or route. And so right here is the intersections of Broadway and Wall Street, which is where Alexander Hamilton is buried in the cemetery at Trinity Church right there. It's Wall Street and Broadway is where all the great financial institutions of the world are. And it started as this very common trading fortress, basically. The Dutch are not there to spread faith. If you guys know anything about Holland, it's one of the most religious places in the world. The most religious people in Holland are the immigrants who come in, mostly Muslims from North Africa. They are pretty devout, but white Dutch folks themselves have really lost faith. It's a society where in polls, 10% of the people believe in God and attend church on a regular basis. And even 400 years ago, they were not too serious about religion. They were money makers. They wanted to make money. So the first census of New Amsterdam in the 1620s tells it all, that there were more taverns or bars per capita than there were churches. There were hardly any churches at all. And they were so tolerant, they allowed anybody and everybody to immigrate there, that the Dutch were a minority in their own colony, that nobody was loyal to the Dutch government itself. They just were there to make money. So all these various people from all corners of the globe were there, all vying to try to make their fortune. And it was a unique colony. It was the most diverse in the New World, and it had a distinctly Dutch flavor to it, meaning that it was incredibly tolerant. The first synagogue or Jewish temple built in the entire Western Hemisphere was built in New York. And that shouldn't surprise you, because the Dutch were cool with whatever you wanted to be, whoever you wanted to be. Now, that didn't stop them from practicing slavery. They bought into this idea that you could make a lot of money, not so much from plantation agriculture, because you can't grow tobacco or anything that far north in New York, but the buying and selling of slaves, which is probably even worse, but they realized they could make a lot of money doing that. So there were a lot of slave traders that would buy fleets of ships, sail them to West Africa, buy boatloads of slaves, and then flip them and sell them for 9 to 10 times the cost in the New World. Horrendous, hideous trade, but people wanted to make money, and this is what they did. So that means New York is this sort of dropping off point, that people from Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia are going to sail not to Africa, but up to New York, buy slaves, and then bring them back down. Okay, that the big ocean going vessels will park in New York. And it didn't just go for slaves, it went for anything that you're going to purchase from the Eastern Hemisphere. You go up to New York and buy it there. That means New York is the hub. It's where everybody's going into and coming out of. It is where the major airport, JFK, is for the East Coast. So you already see the seeds of what becomes New York. Large metropolis, huge transportation hub. It is incredibly diverse. With people from all over the world. And it's almost considered to be like an international city. When you think today, the United Nations is headquartered there, right? The financial capital of the world is there. The entertainment capital of the world. All the radio stations and TV stations, almost all of them are headquartered in New York. Some of them out here on the West Coast too, but certainly around the time of World War II, it was just the center of the world. And the Dutch are very, very proud of this. Now, they only had it for about 40 or 50 years. They will surrender it to the English in 1664 in the Anglo-Dutch War. This is merely because they didn't have the population to maintain control forever. By 1664, the English had control over New England. That's pretty much everything north of New York. So they had Connecticut, they had Rhode Island, they had Massachusetts, they had New Hampshire. And to the south, they had Maryland and Delaware and Virginia. And to the deep south, they had Georgia and North and South Carolina. So New York and New Jersey are this tiny little area which interrupts the flow of this huge empire. So Charles II, king in the 1660s, just woke up one day and said, this is a nuisance and I'm going to take it. So without any provocation or cause, Charles II sent the fleet, the British fleet, to surround Manhattan, to point its gun at the island and to call upon the governor, Peter Stuyvesant, to come out and surrender. Briefly, for about 5 minutes, Stuyvesant runs around town and tries to rally the people of New Amsterdam to the Dutch cause, but none of them volunteer to fight, right? This was populated with people that said, why should I fight to defend for the Dutch crown when I could make money under the English just as easily? And the English terms were very generous. They did not expropriate land, at least not from white people. They would later take land from the Iroquois and other Native American tribes, but from the Dutch settlers, they were very kind. They said, you can keep all of your land, which is why you see these great families still to this day in New York that have these funny Dutch names, right? Some of them become presidents, like the Roosevelts. That's kind of a weird name, right? It's spelled like Roosevelt, R-O-O-S-E-V-E-L-T. That's because the family is Dutch, both Theodore and Franklin. Their lineage, if you go back far enough, is to the Dutch. All these great estates that are upstate in New York, like the Van Rensselaers, right? V-A-N, Van, that is dead giveaway, a prefix in Dutch last names. D-E is another one, D-E, and then whatever your name is, right? DeWeese, DeHaven, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of these families as well, and they prospered under the English, and they lost very little by surrendering here. The individuals got to control it. It was just, the ports now will be controlled by the English, and it will be renamed. I want you to notice the renaming. The renaming is, this is fascinating to me. The Dutch named it New Amsterdam after their capital. They were so proud of it. The English name it after not their capital, New York. Now, if you guys know anything about England, there's really one city worth visiting, and that's London. There are many countries in Europe that are just these beautiful countries like Italy, where each city is more beautiful than the last, and you can get into wonderful debates with people. What's your favorite Italian city? And personally, I love Rome. It's the, it represents the ancient world. You have the Colosseum and all this cool stuff that's over 2,000 years old. My wife loves Florence. Florence is a medieval city. It's a city of the 14 and 1500s. And so she loves Florence. Other people I know, they love Milan because it's sort of the center of fashion and, it has that kind of vibe to it. Other people I know, they love Venice because they love the canals. Other people I know, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on and on. There's just beautiful areas of Italy. What about England? Well, as a tourist, you're going to go to London. You might make your way out to Stonehenge in the west to look at the ruins. Other than that, American tourists do not go to Birmingham, even though it's the second largest city in Great Britain. What's the point? Right? It's just kind of an ugly, gross, regular city. It would be like you guys saying, hey, I've never been to America. Let's go to Cleveland. No offense to Cleveland, but it's not a tourist attraction, right? You go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, you go to Orlando because it's got all the tourist sites. England has London, and that's about it. Why York then? Well, this demonstrates what the purpose of that colony was. So the story goes that Charles II acquired this. No sooner than he acquired New Amsterdam than he tried to get rid of it. He didn't know what to do with it. He just didn't want the Dutch to have it. And he had a sizable debt to his baby brother, James. James was the Duke of York. And so to settle this debt, Charles II basically said, hey, baby brother, do you want this colony? And James said, yeah, that sounds cool. I'd like to have that. And so James said, I'll give it to you, but wipe out the debt and I don't have to pay you back. And so this arrangement was agreed upon. And so James named it after his namesake. He was the Duke of York. And so it was going to be called that. Notice it's not New London. There is a New London. It's in Connecticut, but it's a small little town. Nobody cares about it. But it will be New York, which will become, in the colonial period, it was pretty small, actually, believe it or not. New York is a big port city, but it was smaller than Boston. It was smaller than Philadelphia. But it becomes the American metropolis. It's really a 19th century city. New York blows up in the 1800s and becomes the largest city in America, and it still is. But it's named after, forgive me, this third-rate city in England, because the mentality of the English is that the New World is not that important. There's no direct taxation of that colony, so you're not going to get wealthy off of it. It's where all of the misfits of England go, right? Religious dissidents, Catholics, etc., that don't belong here. They can leave and go to the far side of the world. And so it's named after York, which is not this great English city. So the mindset's very different. The Spanish will only send the best and the brightest to their colonies. In England, the idea is, whoever wants it can take it. We're not that interested, which hopefully explains why the revolution would happen later, is that the English were not really paying attention to the New World, which we are finally at the English. Yay. So the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake is Virginia and Maryland. And I'm just going to hit the high points here. We don't need to go into incredible detail here. You guys read the book, I hope. So the Chesapeake is going to be the first colony, 1607, Jamestown. They built this colony in the worst possible place that one could build a colony. It is on an estuary. That's where the fresh water from the river meets the salt water of the ocean, and it kind of mixes together in the sort of stagnant pond. That made it very hard to dig for water because your wells would be contaminated with salt water. There are malarial mosquitoes starting in April, and they continue on through October. So half the year you're getting stung by mosquitoes and dying of malaria. Food was in small amounts because it was very hard to farm there, and they didn't really bring farming equipment because they thought they would find gold so easily. And so the first 10 years or so, this was just a shockingly grotesque exercise where the Virginia Company would show up in the spring, starts in the spring of 1607, and they have boatloads of people and equipment and all this stuff, animals. And then the next spring, when reinforcements arrive, they find 80% of the population had perished and only 20% was left. And that happened year after year after year, which is amazing that you could even find people that were aware of this appalling death rate and still willing to go, but people did it, which shows you how terrible it was in England, how hopeless that many people thought it was. Yet the colony survives, and mainly it survives because of tobacco. Tobacco becomes the lifeblood of this colony, that finally they realize, put away the picks and shovels and pans and chemicals. We're never going to find gold and silver. Let's grow tobacco instead. That will be our gold, essentially, that we will mine, and it will make us unbelievably rich. And it did. Landowners there reaped huge profits from tobacco harvests. Now, this means a couple of things. Number one, tobacco depletes the soil of its nutrients, so you need fresh land every single year. You can fixate nitrogen into the soil, but it's a very difficult process before fertilizer, so you have to leave the land fallow for a season or two, bury all your animal waste there to get nitrogen back in the soil. And in the meantime, you just move west and take more land, right? You have investors that have given you their money and you have to pay them back. You want to make that money as well. You're risking your life to be way out there on the far side of the world. And everyone's depending on this. You've got indentured servants that expect freedom and freedom dues. The only way to get that's to keep planting, and so you do. Now, slavery itself will be used. 1619 is the first records we have of African slaves being brought to North America and sold. And the Spanish did this in the Caribbean prior to the English, but in what becomes America, this is the first instance, 1619. However, they were still a bit of an exception or a curiosity to the rule. The rule is we use indentured servants. They're from our country, they speak English, it's easier to deal with them, and they're cheaper. It was about half the cost for an indentured servant as it was for an African slave. And so this is the preferred method for the first 60, 70 years. And so it continues on like this. There will be conflict over land because there's this fanning out constantly each season of taking more and more and more land to grow tobacco to sell back to Europeans. And this got them into trouble with the Powhatan Nation. War after war after war will emerge over this struggle. Okay, and many Native Americans start to regret this decision they made to allow whites to come in. But tobacco cultivation will continue. Slavery itself will not really replace indentured servitude until Bacon's Rebellion, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what's the class makeup of this colony? Well, it's very different than New Spain or New France. The way largely it will work is you have two classes of people that are dissatisfied with England. Number one is what I call the near nobility, sort of very rich people that are second, third, fourth, fifth sons of the nobility. If you guys don't know how feudalism works, you have a father who is the Lord of Buckinghamshire, and the title goes to the oldest son. And so what happens if you're the second oldest son? What happens if you're a twin of, like you and your brother are, twin sons of the Lord of Buckinghamshire, but your older brother's 5 minutes older than you? Well, guess what? You just were 5 minutes from glory. What do you do your whole life? Well, you help your brother out. You probably live in the attic of his great castle. Whenever there's a peasant revolt, you get on a suit of armor and you put down that revolt. If there's a great war that you're going to fight, you could probably be, a captain or something like that. But you're never going to be this incredible individual who makes decisions and, has this great responsibility. But if you go to America, you can be. So it's very interesting. You have a population that goes to Virginia that's not nobility, never was, because the nobility would never have left England to begin with. They remained in England for the responsibilities to the crown. Whereas these FFVs, I call them, the founding fathers of Virginia, these are people with last names like Lee, Randolph, Jefferson, Washington, Madison. They became very big landowners and powerful people in Virginia. They're frustrated by the English nobility system, so they left. And Virginia Company will hire them to bring their wealth in and buy up huge tracts of land and plant tobacco. The other group of people are, at first anyway, before African slaves represent a huge percentage of the population, is indentured servants. So these people were criminals who were given an option, right? You get the death penalty, or we will let you go to Virginia and be an indentured servant. You might have been just a poor peasant who lives on a lord's manor, and then that lord says, I need 20 of you to leave because honestly, I don't need you here. Economic and technological developments by the 1600s allowed England to be very efficient with their farming. And so, let's imagine you had, 500 peasants on a plot of land. You don't need that many to actually do the work. Maybe you only need 200 or 400. And so you want some of those people to leave and you kick them off. Some of them go to the big cities and they become homeless or unemployed. But some of them were told you can go to America and actually be somebody and you can own land. And people had this dream, the American dream. And so these people would sell themselves into slavery. Remember, it was 5 to 7 years. And always the promise was that you would gain your freedom and that you would get land, a draft animal, a gun. Those are all the symbols of independence. So you might ask, if you're aware of this, why is the United States the one advanced country in the world that allows gun ownership? Most other countries either don't allow it or is so regulated. Short answer is it's in the Second Amendment. But why is it in the Second Amendment? It's this very old notion that gun ownership represented manhood. When I say manhood, I mean not just an adult male, but somebody, a nobleman, a gentleman. We live in a world today where the title Mr. is given to any adult male. I'm Mr. Osborne just because I'm an adult, right? I like to think I'm a teacher. I worked hard, that's a sign of respect as well. But really, you would probably give that title to any male who was over the age of 18. It was very different 400 years ago. If you had, you know, some poor peasant on a farm, he was just Joe Smith. You would never refer to him as Mr. That title was reserved as an honorific for gentlemen. And so it wasn't just money, it was like prestige, it was respect, it was status in your society to own land. And then along with that, you got a gun to protect your land. They didn't allow peasants in England to own guns because that would be a disaster. The peasants would be rebelling all the time. But they do allow landowners, the nobility, to own firearms so that they could hunt and protect their land, etc. And it was involved in land ownership. And so you get a plot of land, a draft animal, and a gun to protect all of it. And it was like you were a gentleman. And the weird dynamic of America is that it was a continent virtually evacuated of its population through disease. So there were so few people that the land was so cheap or even free that you would prefer to buy the land, but if Native Americans refused to sell it to you, you could just take it. It wasn't right to do it, but it was easy by and large. And so people just took it and then they became somebody. And so people can't even wrap their heads around this concept. In England, it's a tiny island. The population in the 1600s is probably 3 million people or so on this tiny island. Everybody's vying for control of land so that they can serve in the House of Commons, you know, lower house of parliament, so that you can own a gun, so that you can vote, so that you can be somebody. Land is the doorway to all of that. It's kind of like today, education is your route to become a middle class, you know, person that can climb the social ladder and gain respect and wealth and admiration. 400 years ago, it was land ownership. It's a weird concept for us to wrap our heads around. So this is why these two groups go. You have the rich who were, you know, younger sons of the nobility. There's no way they'll break out of that role unless they go to America. Indentured servants, same thing. Okay. And then slaves, of course, are going to be purchased when there's sort of a shortage in the indentured servant market. And then they will become a very large population in the 1700s. At the time of the Revolution, 1776, about a quarter of the population of Virginia was enslaved Africans. Okay, so they're very important as well. That's all we really need to say about it. The only difference between Maryland and Virginia is Maryland will be pretty much for Catholic refugees. So I want you to notice this. This is kind of interesting that France, for instance, although they were pretty liberal and tolerant as European countries go, they would not allow Protestant immigration. There were a handful of French Protestants. They called themselves Huguenots. They were not allowed to immigrate to the New World because they were thought of as untrustworthy. You can't trust these people. They're a security risk. They're not Catholic. The reverse about England, right? England is a Protestant country. What about Catholics in England? There were many Catholics in the royal family. Remember, England had been Catholic for 1,000 years. And when Henry launches the Reformation, most people go along with it and become Protestants, but there were a handful of royal families or nobility that said, no, we're not going along with this. We're going to stay Catholic. They were persecuted. Many people didn't trust them, so they wouldn't be given, you know, commissions in the army and navy, etc. And so they were told, you can go to the New World. And a whole colony was given for them, and it's named for the Virgin Mary, right? If you guys don't know, Catholics are very big on the Virgin Mary to an extent that Protestants are not. And so they named their colony Maryland, right? Maryland, as we would call it. It's tobacco producing, but that demonstrates to you, hopefully, that the English were more tolerant than their Catholic counterparts. The Spanish, oh my God, they tortured Jewish and Muslim people, got them to convert or kick them out of Spain. They would never have allowed Jewish or Muslim or Protestant people to go to New Spain. The English were kind of okay with it because, again, they didn't care about the colonies that much. Unlike the other countries, they're not directly taxing it, so they're not making that much money off of it. And they just felt, we don't really care about it that much anyway. So we want these people out of England. We don't want Catholics to be, you know, plotting the destruction of England in England. So if they want to go to Maryland and have at it, that's cool. So what you have is a population, a collection of people in British North America who were very disaffected. Most of them don't like the mother country. I mean, they're loyal, they like it, but they don't like their role in it, so they have left, which is going to be an explosive powder keg. You're going to have a huge group of people who, when the time comes, they'll just say, why don't we be our own country? Because I don't fit in here anyway. Okay, so high degree of land ownership here. Most free white men owned land so they could vote. A full 2/3 of free white men could vote and hold office in Virginia, whereas in England it was only 1/3. So those statistics were reversed. It's a bigger land ownership class, which gave more opportunities. Okay, spilling over here, we got Maryland. I already said that. We're good on that. So let's do Bacon's Rebellion. So Bacon's Rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon was pretty well-to-do nobleman. He shows up in Virginia trying to take over, essentially. He's like, I want to be governor, and I should be able to be governor in just a couple of years. And they don't like him there very much at all. The governor, Governor Berkeley, and others just kind of look at him askew, and they just say, who is this guy? He needs to wait his turn. We don't like him. And so they wouldn't let him take part in government. So Bacon gets very upset at this, and he apprises himself of the political situation very rapidly, and he says, I see what's going on here. There's a lot of indentured servants. They're rather unhappy with the political situation because by that time, by the 1670s, Virginia had made peace with the Powhatan Nation and started to crack down on squatters. What that means is indentured servants were told, when you become free, you can't go west and take land. I know we promised you that we would let you do it, but new circumstances have arisen. There is no more land to be had. They're not selling it, and they will go to war with us if we take it, so you can't do it. And so what if you just said, well, screw it, I'm going to take it anyway, right? You got your freedom dues, you did your 5 years of service, you get your gun, and they say, you're going to be a sharecropper living on this land, but you don't get to keep everything that the land produces. You're only going to keep like 50%. Well, these people were enraged at that, and Bacon spoke to that. Bacon told them, follow me and I will give you your land. We'll make war on the Native Americans and I will give you the land that you've been promised. You've been lied to. Your own people, the English, lied to you to get you way out here, do their dirty work, you know, to produce tobacco. And when the time comes, you don't get your freedom. This is outrageous, right? And he speaks to this and it works. There's this enormous rebellion, and it was, in the short term anyway, successful. They took control over Jamestown. They burned it to the ground. Bacon's starting to think about how he wants to remake this colony towards his own ends, and he dies of dysentery. There was a terrible outbreak that winter, and the government, Berkeley, has to flee to England itself. And so when the Redcoats return with reinforcements in the spring of 1677, they say, this is not going to work. We're going to have to change the whole way that we operate here in Virginia. And so they make a conscious choice not to use indentured servants as a primary means of labor anymore. They're going to use African slaves more. Now, understand that this is a continuum that gradually shifts, right? There were African slaves in Virginia as early as 1619. But again, they were the minority of that labor force. It was preferred to use indentured servants. Indentured servants are cheaper. Most people were more comfortable with them because there was no language barrier. They were just poor English folks. And occasionally you would buy African slaves, you know, whenever there was just not enough indentured servants around. So they were there, but they were not the preferred laborers. After Bacon's Rebellion, there's a huge switch because the feeling was indentured servants are dangerous. They have the most dangerous thing of all, and that's expectations. And if you don't meet those expectations, they will violently rebel, which they did. And so the government started to say, okay, let's use African slaves. Landowners didn't like that. They said African slaves are twice the price of an indentured servant. So the government started to tweak the laws to make it more profitable. This is where it becomes really nasty and awful. But the laws were written to offset the cost. Slaves cost twice as much, so guess what? No 5 to 7 year contract. It will be for life. Second, in indentured servitude, it was always felt that a child should be born free, that slavery was always a punishment for something. Either you were a prisoner of war or a criminal or whatever, and it was always voluntary. You sold yourself into indentured servitude. Not here. What had these African slaves done to anyone? Nothing. They were just wrong place, wrong time. Other tribes enslaved them and then sold them to Europeans to take them to the New World. And so these changes in the law were done to placate landowners, to make them happy. And so very rapidly in the 1700s, slaves will replace indentured servants. Now, indentured servants are still there as late as 1776. In fact, there are rather important indentured servants who arrived to America in 1768 or so, and then they gain their freedom with the Revolution, and many of them take part in government. There's one gentleman who's an incredible individual. His name is William Findley, and he arrived in Pennsylvania in the 1760s, and as an indentured servant, he was offered his chance to gain his freedom by serving the Revolution, and he did. And he became a landowner, and then a congressman, and then a senator, right? By the 1800s, by the time that he died, he had served in just about every office you could serve in Pennsylvania, and it's an extraordinary story. I'm very sorry to say we did not extend that enlightenment to African slaves, that indentured servants were kind of on the way out in the 1700s. They still existed, but they were a bit of a curiosity, and they would gain their freedom with the Revolution. Slaves would not, I'm sorry to say, at least not in the South. In the North, they would. And that's something that we could sort of, be proud of, that New England did away entirely with slavery during the Revolution, and because of the Revolution, because all men are created equal. The South did not agree with that, unfortunately. So that's Bacon's Rebellion, and that's why it's so important. Okay, I am running out of time here. So what can we say about New England? All right. Excuse me one second. So New England is very, very important. New England today is the northeastern corner of the country. It is always the richest, most developed section of the country. It always has, highest standard of living, all that good stuff. And this is largely because of the work ethic, because of the attitude and spirit of New England. If Virginia represented kind of high and low, right? Virginia was like the rich and the poor, right? It was the founding fathers of Virginia, these sort of, relatives of the nobility who were incredibly wealthy and well off. And then you had the incredibly poor, the indentured servants. New England is the solid middle class. That's all that it is. They don't have indentured servants really in any numbers, and they don't have these wealthy noblemen either. They are the middle class. And so what was middle class during that time? Really two groups. Number one, yeoman farmers. These are people that own farms and they own land, but they're not rich enough to be planters who actually hire somebody else to do the work or purchase human beings to do the work. Thomas Jefferson was not one who would get his fingernails dirty by actually farming. If the guy actually had to farm, he'd probably starve, because I don't think he actually knew how to do it. He was too busy learning 5 languages, reading philosophy, writing the Declaration of Independence, right? Northerners, like John Adams, they had 2 roles. They were sort of farmer / tradesmen. That's very common in New England, where you're a yeoman farmer, so you know the basics of farming, but you also had to learn another trade, because guess what? The off season is really long. You farm from like April to November, and then after the harvest, you've got 5 or 6 months with very little to do. And so you learn a trade. You become a tanner. A tanner is someone who makes leather, right? You become a cooper. That's a barrel maker. You become a candlestick maker, or a sail maker, or you learn some trade. You buy a book and you study it and you learn how to make something. Like you become a silversmith, so you can make teapots and silver and knives and sell those in the off season, because there's this great Yankee Protestant work ethic, which says the idle hands are the devil's playground. You got to keep busy, right? A dollar saved is a dollar earned, etc. All these great Yankee sayings. Now, when I say the term Yankee, it gets confusing here because you'll say, oh yeah, that's the New York baseball team. Yankee is just a generic term, and this is where it gets confusing, that means New Englander. I know that's confusing because the Red Sox out of New England absolutely hate the Yankees, but historically speaking, the term Yankee has a couple different meanings. So number one, the literal meaning is a New England farmer slash tradesman, very hardworking person, a Puritan, basically. If you are in the South, Yankee is an insult that you refer to any Northerner. Any Northerner is a Yankee. If you are out of the United States, a Yank or a Yankee just means an American, right? So don't get offended if you're in Ireland or England or Australia or New Zealand or Canada and they hear you talking and they say, oh, you're a Yankee. Don't say, no, I hate the Yankees. It just means American. That's all it means, Yank or Yankee. So different contexts and different meanings. Yankee in this context will mean a New England farmer slash tradesman, very hardworking. These people were Puritans. They're on the one hand, political refugees, and on the other hand, religious refugees. When Henry VIII broke free from the Catholic Church, many people just went along with it because they said this is the way that the government is now. Other people were true believers. They read the Bible and they said, dear Lord, the Catholic Church is wrong about everything and we need to change everything around. They wanted to, quote, purify the Catholic Church out of the Church of England, right? Is that Henry kept a lot of the old rituals, like having stained glass windows, like the sale of indulgences, like a lot of different practices, like communion, where the communion altar is, things that we don't even care about today, but they were viciously contested in the late 1500s and early 1600s. And Puritans felt that this was serious. This is about the souls of every last British person and my own children. And so if this church is going to fail us, we're going to go to the New World. Some of them went to Holland first because Holland had a tradition of, freedom of religion, do what you want. And they realized that was a huge problem because freedom of religion meant that people could do whatever they wanted there. And so the government of Holland allowed Jews, the first Jewish population, out of the ghettos of Amsterdam and Rotterdam and to go have businesses anywhere they wanted. And that shocked many Puritans. They were like, I don't want my children intermingling with non-Christians. Catholics were allowed to practice and preach whatever they wanted to do. Atheists were able to not go to church. And so little Puritan children are like walking around the streets of Amsterdam, learning about these ideas. And very quickly, Puritan parents said, forget this, we're going to go to America where there's no other influence. There's just Native Americans. And guess what? We're not going to live with them. They won't be an example for my children. So they show up in Plymouth, England in 1620 on the Mayflower, small number of them, only about 100 of them. And they found the colony of Plymouth. And John Winthrop, this gentleman in the picture here, says, we're going to build a shining city on a hill. We're going to be a beacon of light to lead the world. Everyone's going to look at our example and we will be perfect. No crime, etc. We're going to build a utopia. It's this great American attitude. Some people say it's arrogant. Maybe it is a bit. But the attitude is that we're going to lead the example for everybody else. There is no starving time in New England, meaning that this is not a place where they didn't plan. They look for gold and silver a little bit, but they make sure that they work hard to have a good harvest. The winters are unbelievably harsh in New England. There's no way to grow tobacco, so they got creative. I love these stories about Yankee ingenuity. They would do things, for instance, like start a lumber business, because in England, they were hungry for lumber to build homes, but also wood would fire their steam engines. And so they were hungry for lumber. Yankees in New England would go to the wilderness and chop down the forest. You get this big byproduct with lumber, and that is sawdust, which to a Yankee Puritan, it's sinful to waste anything. So just to throw away sawdust, that's not good. Well, they figured out that sawdust could be sold for insulation, that you could line the walls of your home with it, and that would insulate the home better, keep it, cool in the summer and warm in the winter. That you could pack fresh fruits and vegetables with ice and pack sawdust around it, and it would not melt for, many, many days. And so they start selling sawdust because they don't want just a penny of waste over anything. So they are not big landowners, they're not big slave owners. Don't think, well, they're better people, they wouldn't own slaves. They would if they could, but since they can't grow tobacco, they're not going to be, by and large, slave owners. Some of them who become very wealthy that live in big cities like Boston will own slaves as house servants, but it's not the labor force that will produce the wealth of that society. It's self-sufficient farms that grow their own stuff, trade between each other, and then learning another trade to sell to other people. The most British food I can think of is fish and chips. Well, guess what? The cod, the fish that you're fishing, does not swim in the waters around England. It swims in the waters around New England. So fishermen there fish, put the fish into barrels, and then ship it across the Atlantic. The barrel maker makes money, the shipbuilder makes money, the fisherman makes money, and everybody in New England was money. Solid middle class, and they'll be doing very, very well for themselves. Okay, so they brought their wives with them, they brought their children with them, they had big families, and they read the Bible, and they kept this, culture that they had in England and kept it spreading to New England. Okay, we're kind of out of time here. I just wanted to go over the basics there. I'll mention the Salem witch trials at the beginning of the lecture next time, but I wanted to get this lecture out there so you guys could watch it. There'll be a couple of questions that go along with it, but awesome. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. So here we go.